Basically, again, just as a summary, the first point that Neil Postman makes in terms of his insightful analysis of technological change is that technology always comes with trade-offs. So for every benefit, there is a cost, very often a hidden cost, that the engineers of such technologies, of course, do not tell us about, and passive users simply subconsciously and passively accept. And we have to watch out for those hidden costs. His second idea is basically that the advantages and disadvantages of these technologies, so even if you're able to identify them for yourself, be sure that they are not evenly distributed. Okay, so that means that there are going to be some winners and some losers for the most part. And one has to be, again, very, very discerning. So once you do identify some of the benefits and some of the hidden costs, the question is, what is the social distribution of the benefits and the costs? Very often, there are some who are so-called huge winners. So for example, certain technocrats. Or let's look at big data. You see, so the 5 most lucrative and profitable companies, most powerful corporations in the world right now, are in the IT industry. So the big data companies, you know. And while they may be benefiting, the question is, what is the impact that this has not only on other industries, in some sense, that of course become dependent on big data, right, on information technology, but also those, as we said, whose lives are affected, disrupted, distorted, maybe denatured, the order of nature, of course, and the impact on that. So it's not simply humans or some humans that might be losers. It is also the natural order and our relationship with that. And to be very, very clear about that, Neil Postman again suggests that we ask very poignant questions. And those questions I will share with you now. One question is, who specifically benefits from the development of a new technology? Which groups, which types of person, what kind of industry will be favored? And of course, which groups and people will be harmed thereby? Okay, so he himself, writing in, again, the mid-90s, did not have the chance to go through everything we have gone through. Okay, so going back about 10, 11 years with the launch of the iPhone, for example, Neil Postman did not live to see everything that happened from 2000 onward. But what he's saying, at least in my perspective, applies even more and is even more crucial and even more urgent and important now than it was in his own time. And it is incredible that he was already trying to make us aware during that time. And as we said at the beginning, that his books are, in some sense, not read, surprisingly enough, and largely ignored. All of his warnings and insights. So when he, for example, he himself gives an example about the computer revolution and so on, is of course the winners. They're going to be the computer companies, the multinational corporations, the nation state, And the thing is that all of those who benefit radically from engineering new technologies do something. You see, that makes it very hard for us to identify the losers. What do? They promise that everyone is a winner, right? So everyone is a winner. So you see, it wouldn't make any sense for these companies who develop these smart devices to come and tell me about all of the costs and the downsides and the harmful aspects, right? So that means even if I'm able to identify it, the advertising and the marketing that goes into it never, of course, gives me the feeling that I'm a loser. but that I'm also a winner. So this is something that Neil Postman, of course, is asking us to be very, very wary about. And the questions, he says, must always be asked, right? So again, who are the winners? Who are the losers? There are always going to be winners and losers, and we should not, in some sense, fall for the trap of ignoring some of the curses that come along with these technologies. He says the winners are always speaking constantly of the information age. And they're always implying that the more information we have, the better we will be off in solving significant problems. Not only personal ones, but also large-scale social ones. But how true is this? If there are children starving in the world, and there are, it is not because of insufficient information. We have known for a long time how to produce food enough to feed every child on the planet. How is it that we let so many of them starve? If there's violence on our streets, it's not because we have insufficient information. If women are abused, if divorce and pornography and mental illness are increasing, none of it has to do with insufficient information. I dare say it is because something else is missing. And I don't think I have to tell this audience what it is. Who knows? This age of information may turn out to be a curse if we're blinded to it, so that we cannot see truly where the problems lie. That is why it's always necessary for us to ask those who speak so enthusiastically of computer technology, why do you think like this? What is behind your enthusiasm really? What interests do you really represent? To whom are you hoping to give power? From whom will you be withholding power? So you see such poignant questions, right? So everything is often reduced, in some sense, to the benefit of that technology. And again, the losses for us, never spoken of. So point 1 and 2 very much go together. Is that clear? Are any questions on the second point?
No, not really.
So
he's challenging the notion that data and information is directly responsible for solving, or is the soul responsible for solving the social problems of our time.
Right. And he's only using this as an example. I mean, we can in some sense go and we can also look at other technologies and the technological infrastructures that they bring with them. So again, going to the automobile, the notion is that, of course, automobile manufacturers want to, in some sense, say that this automobile is your solution to mobility, and it's the ultimate solution to mobility. And it can't get better than this. You know, it's the most practical. All of your problems shall be solved in terms of mobility if you get into this automobile, right? And now, of course, mere functionalism doesn't do it. So they're advertising using emotionalism. It's no longer functional. It's not just mobility getting from A to B. It makes you feel amazing as well. It becomes a status symbol, you see. So identity formation is even advertised through automobiles. You see, so it's like a one device that can, in some sense, do so many things. And you see the problem, he's going to mention this in some of the future points, but I'm saying from a more, let's say, a religious and metaphysical perspective, one could say that this is pseudo-messianism. You see, that you have technological devices and industries coming and promising that they can basically save you from all of your troubles, right? Now, we don't have enough time. If we had 2 sessions, I would show you some videos that I've been collecting over the last few years because I teach this kind of stuff about future visions, okay, of all of these big data companies. For example, Microsoft and Google and Apple and so on. When you look at those future visions, what do I see? I see basically a world in which all of these devices, which the company actually produces, have more or less become native inhabitants. You see, they look so naturally integrated, and the humans and those machines and those technological worlds, in some sense, seem to be basically dancing with one another. And there is never, ever, ever have I seen in one of those future visions any suffering. You see? That means the road to that digital Technopolis, you see? Technopolis, the city where technologism basically governs. That world, that city, that utopia, allows no suffering. That means it's the bridge, you see? It's that messianic bridge which will lead you to that technological heaven in some sense. And all of the advertisements and the future visions that you look at, in some sense, say this. They say that everyone shall be a winner. There shall be no losers. Everyone gets into that high-tech heaven, in a certain sense. This is the promise, you see? And this is why Neil Postman is saying that we should be very, very wary, because have we not had these technologies now for hundreds of years? I mean, the printing press, for example, or the automobile, or computers now, you know, personal computers, for more than 30 years now, right? But has that meant that human suffering has been abated simply because we have used and adopted these technologies? And yet, the advertising agencies and marketing departments of all of these companies, of course, what they always say is that if you just come along for the ride, well, you shall land in, you know, in some kind of like, in some state of nirvana, I suppose, right? I mean, everything shall be solved. This is your key. And this is what Postman is really viscerally challenging. So basically saying, watch out. The third point, the third idea. This is a really, really, really important one. Precisely because I think this is the biggest one that we all miss, and especially those who have a background in modern science and technology. The notion, or our presumption, is that technology is neutral, right? Most people, including the engineers that I deal with on a routine basis, they always say that, well, this is not good or bad. It's just a neutral device. And this is amazing. Even people who are not simply mad, you know, as technophiles, people who love technological devices, technophiles, they also say this. You know, they'll like, okay, a bed. I mean, it's just a bed. It's something that someone constructed, you know, it was more mechanical and so on, and it just basically has this function. What's wrong with that? What's wrong with this? There's nothing wrong with it. It's the human who decides whether they put it to good use or evil use, you see? But there is something troubling about this. I mean, is there anyone who has any ideas before we present Postman's own ideas? Do you also think that all forms of technology are pretty much neutral, or is it only some of them which are in some sense charged with certain values, or none of them? I mean, how do you see things? And you can take an example of a let's say contemporary, you know, technological device you use on a daily basis, and think about it for a moment. Do you think it's neutral? Do you think it is charged with prejudices? I mean, and how so? Do technologies automatically come in with values, or are they just tools you use? Neutral.
They are useful as well as harmful in some aspects.
Indeed.
Okay, so they can be useful and harmful. Okay, but if I say they could be useful and could be harmful, then does that mean that in itself it's neutral?
This is a very interesting feminist perspective I just came over this, that, you know, the algorithms that they're using on Facebook or in machine learning and artificial intelligence products, so they are patriarchal inherently because they have been designed by male data scientists.
Okay. Yes. Okay. So okay, this is a great point, right? So that in some sense, okay, there's a feminist critique that this what is actually being produced in terms of information technology and the algorithms, right? Okay, so our misogynist in some sense. Okay. This is not unrelated to actually the maybe the biggest myth, and the biggest story which is often missed, and which is very important, I think, for this discussion, which is the story of Frankenstein. So in this story, this book, this was the 200th anniversary in 2018. 200 years ago, this book came out. And Frankenstein, the Modern Prometheus. The subtitle is The Modern Prometheus. And it was written by an 18-year-old woman. Mary Shelley was 18 when she wrote the book. And it is arguably the most important book and most widely, let's say, popularized book. It is not read, you see, but it's the greatest cultural manifestation in some sense, I would say. It's one of the greatest cultural artifacts that the West has produced, and not really read in a sense, But some people also say that this is also was a kind of feminist move. That she was basically, in some sense, saying this is what happens when we try to engineer and create life without the feminine. But I mean, I'm not totally in favor of that. I'm saying that some of these kinds of feminine critiques have been going on for 200 plus years now, and there should be taken into account. But that's because in some sense, it also shows whether values are being curved in some sense when it comes to technological formation. But again, the key question for the third point on technology by Neil Postman is basically whether technologies and technological systems are neutral or whether they are value laden, whether there are some values which automatically are bound to them. The usual response, or the dominant response by technologists, scientists, and I think the vast majority of humans, is that no, it's just what we make of them. In and of themselves, everything is neutral. But he says, watch out for this. He says, watch out. There's something that we are not really considering. And he gives us a couple examples. He says, maybe you're familiar with the saying, to a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. See, like, what is this? This is a proverb, right? This is a proverb. What does that exactly mean? He says, let me go further. To a person with a TV camera, everything looks like image. He says, to a person with a computer, everything looks like data. Now, look, now he's saying this, like I said, in the 1990s, right? But after we get through Postman's 5 points, there were some ideas I wanted to share with you, and it has to do with all of the most recent developments in terms of not just secular humanism, which I think you all have probably discussed in the previous sessions, but also what has been emerging in terms of things called transhumanism and even posthumanism. When you look at those things, it is clear that not simply human systems, meaning the structure of the body and the structure of the mind, but also formations and structures in the natural world are simply what? Algorithms. That means for technocrats and technologists who are in the ICT industries and who are gaining more and more traction and dominance over various spheres of life, this is what it is. These are different algorithms that are basically operative even at the cell system, mere programs, and it's nothing else. There's nothing metaphysical about it. There's no wonder in it. There should be no appreciation and thankfulness. I mean, this is not a gift. It's just a bunch of algorithms, and if you can write, you can author them. You see? So that means for a person, let's say, who is a religious, believing, let's say, metaphysician, for that person, life also means something else. So the very practices and the techniques of meditating and praying would be techniques which also in some sense govern the meaning. You see, those technologies and those techniques mean that I am receiving the world and I'm receiving other humans and myself as a gift. So what are my practices of thankfulness? Those become my technologies, the technologies of the heart. But you see, for another person who doesn't buy that narrative and says, well, everything is a mere algorithm and everything is determined by these data structures, then the technologies that are produced also, in some sense, are manifestations and expressions of those values. You see? So they become concrete programs, they become concrete systems. In fact, the very shapes, you see, the very shapes of the different technologies, the fact that this is shaped like this and not in another way, are always determined by the vision and the values that lie behind them, precisely in those who are engineering them. I ask this question, of course, of those that I myself teach. I asked an engineer once, I said, can you tell me, what is life to an engineer? And he has to, so to an engineer, life is, and then he had to fill in the blank. And he said, a technical challenge. And I said, okay, and to a manager, I asked, okay, tell me, what is life? And he said, well, life, can you fill that in? Life to a businessman is, and he said, well, an opportunity for profit. So that means the systems that we develop, in some sense, come in with those dominant value determinations. Okay? So again, make maybe a direct quote from Postman before I go on to his fourth point. He says, the idea again is that every technology has a philosophy of which it is the expression. Okay? So how you basically make the technology, how people use it, is also governed by a worldview which carries along, of course, its own values. So that's why it is, again, very, very tricky to simply think that these things just come out of nowhere from a vacuum and they do not embody and incorporate values. There is a talk by Saito Nasr, which in this respect might be helpful. It is called Naming Evil, where he actually looks at how scientism, you see, so ideologies of modern science basically cut off notions of radical good and radical evil and make us, in some sense, believe as if we are somehow existing on the surface in a place which is neutral, value-free, so to say. So the devaluation of good and evil has meant that science, or the scientific ideology of the modern world, believes that it can play the game as if things are neutral, which is, of course, very convenient because then it can fill in those vacuums which it has cleared of absolute value. It can now fill it in with its own constructed values in order to promote its own technologies. So first you have to deny that there's absolute good, and then later on you can say, well, this technology is the only good for you. So
brilliant.
So these are subtle moves which are being made, and Neil Postman is helping us unmask them so that we might be able to protect ourselves, you know. In a documentary which I saw and I showed to my students in Germany, and it's beautiful. It's a documentary on Neil Postman, and he presents his ideas. It's much better than any English language documentary, so I'm sorry about that because it's only somehow dubbed in German. But he himself says this. He says that if he were not doing what he does as a professor of culture and technology and social thought, he would probably be some kind of contemplative monk, you see. And I think this is precisely what lies behind this, that it is those who are great contemplatives, and they practice meditation and insight, and meditating also actively upon what is going on in the social terrain, that can offer this. It's not the ones who identify themselves with the technologies and the systems, because they're always operating under the influence of the different power struggles and interests. But if one is able to practice some detachments like Neil Postman, then he can give us some great beneficial help. So point number 4, his fourth idea. This is brilliant. Again, he says technological change is not additive, it is ecological. Again, technological change is not additive, it is ecological. And the example is, if I have a glass of water, he says, and imagine that I have some saffron You see, so I put some saffron powder. Which is my favorite, and I use it so much, in fact, that I have gotten a kind of ban on using it at home. So my wife has told me that you overuse it, and this should not be used so much, you know. That originally it's for royalty and kings and so on, and you're not a king, so don't use it, you know. So, so, but but still secretly, if I go and I put a little bit here in my, let's say, in my cup or in my chai or something, then you realize that what happens is that it dissolves. That means the entire body of water within the cup is now, of course, affected by the taste, by the beautiful scent, by the color and everything. So it's not water plus saffron anymore, you see. It's like saffron water. It's saffron tea. And this is exactly what he wants us to realize when it comes to technological innovations and movements. So what happens is, for example, with the printing press, the Gutenberg printing press, if you really look at what happened in Europe and in the rest of the world, this is no longer Germany plus the printing press, you see. When Martin Luther came along, he actually utilized, you see, this technological innovation to distribute his message to thousands and thousands and thousands. And many say that without this technological innovation, the Reformation would not have happened. You see. So again, it's not Martin Luther plus, you know, his 95 Theses. It's not Germany or during those times, different kinds of city-states plus the printing press or the printing machine. It is something which again spreads in exponential ways and affects us in ways that we often do not understand and cannot even imagine, you know, on the material and the social plane. So an extra point that he makes that we should be really aware of. He says that this is why, if you understand that technological change is often ecological, this is why you have to be very, very cautious about those who are the promoters. Because the consequences of these changes are often so vast and unpredictable. So he says, capitalists especially, he says you got to be very suspicious of capitalists, right? Who are very much involved in technocracy. He says they are, by definition, not only risk takers, but they are cultural risk takers. The most creative and daring of them hope to exploit new technologies to the fullest. And they don't care much about what traditions they are overthrowing in the process or whether or not a culture is prepared to function without such traditions. Capitalists are, in a word, radicals. You see, so the thing is that we also have to, as a side point, he doesn't go into this, but we have to also understand that the concepts and the words and the social structures that emerge as different technologies emerge very often are also co-engineered so that the development of these technologies, in some sense, become more and more convenient and comfortable. So that it's not simply the engineering of certain devices and systems, but the receptivity. We have to make you more receptive to adopt these things, you see? And that means that if you have to overthrow certain traditions, right, which have been, let's say, with your native culture and heritage for thousands of years, well, it doesn't really matter because, why? They're not living traditions. I'm going to call them outdated. And I'm going to bring you something new. So the notion is that the living, organic, sacred history also that many cultures bring with them are no longer witnessed, no longer recognized, because those who have material prowess and are pushing these technologies very easily come, they run over them. And they themselves do not have the background and understanding of whether such traditions actually bring in things which are invaluable. Benefits which, humanly speaking, shall not be touched. So a reverence or a sense of the sacred certainly does not color the decision-making of radical capitalists who are technological innovators. You see, and I've gone to many of these innovation consultancies, and interviewed, many of the leading, let's say, innovation consultants to try to get a sense of the inner logic of their worldviews. And I'm sorry to say that in 100% of the cases, there is really no sense of reverence for a higher law or for the sacred. All of those things are seen as useless, as outdated, as not efficient and profitable enough. So those value systems are brought in, and everything is pulverized and run over. So it's really no mercy. It's a kind of very ruthless process. And Neil Postman is saying, be very wary of capitalist technocrats. They're not willing to stop at anything. This is what he's saying. He gives an example by looking at politics to demonstrate this point. He says, it's clear by now that the people who have had the most radical effect on American politics in our time are not political ideologues or student protesters with long hair in the 1960s who have copies of Karl Marx under their arms. These are not the radicals who changed the American political landscape, he says. You know who they are? The radicals who have changed the nature of politics in America are entrepreneurs in dark suits and gray ties who manage large industrial television and media corporations in America. They did not mean, of course, to turn political discourse into a form of entertainment. They didn't mean to make it impossible for an overweight person or a person of this or that background to run for high political office. They didn't mean to reduce political campaigning to 30-second TV ad campaigns. All they were trying to do is to make television into a vast, unsleeping money machine. That they destroyed substantive political discourse in the process does not concern them. You see? So you just bring in and you implement your money-making system, and well, like any good system, it has some side effects, but who cares? You see? And this is what should really trouble us. This is what he's doing. He's a warner. He's warning us about everything seems so natural and we're so habituated. It's almost second nature. And he's saying, well, let us examine this. Because the unexamined life, also in a technological age, maybe is not worth living. So let us practice this. Is that okay? So again, technological change is not additive, it is ecological. And to the point that it just happens so fast that we're inside of it, and of course we don't really know what's going on. Shall we move on to the very last point then? Is that okay?
Yes. Yeah.
The very last point, his point 5, is that forms, mediums of technology, technological devices, systems, and structures tend, after some time, to become mythic. So this goes even beyond what he said in the last point, that they're ecological. They even tend to become mythic. Because at some point, this is one of the points I think we made earlier about, let's say, the automobile and the infrastructure and everything that goes with it. After some time, you simply believe that it's just like a God-given thing. It just belongs to your private sphere, to the social sphere, to your professional sphere, to the family sphere, to the natural sphere. Every domain of life, you see, is in some sense technologized. You see, it's digitized. You go through the digital revolution. Those people who, in some sense, perhaps were prior to this, they still have memories, living memories prior to it, they can still compare. But what about, for example, the 12-year-old? Okay, you live in this world and you assume that these things simply have been there, and you cannot imagine an alternative. And this is one of the ways in which these technological systems disempower you by actually disabling your imagination to imagine an alternative. They make it seem as if living in this way is inevitable. See, this is inevitable. This is how it has been. And I'm sorry, I can't even imagine what our forefathers and foremothers were doing without what we had. I'm so sorry for them. I can only pity them. You see, so there's an implicit sense of superiority by living in this kind of constructed myth, which we are not ever enabled, encouraged, or empowered to question. And when something becomes mythic in that sense, as he says, watch out, it is totalitarian. It's absolutistic. And without even pronouncing itself, you see, the old totalitarianisms that emerged, and some of which continue to live, the 1.0, the tyrannies, they're very much in your face, and they use very aggressive methods. So that, for example, if a person speaks about a particular political ideology which has become tyrannical, well, there's house arrest, you might get thrown into prison, there's torture, and there's, of course, death, and so on and so forth. But more sophisticated forms, 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, what they do, Neil Postman himself says, this was in a documentary, it's no longer like, let's say, Soviet communist mode, where Big Brother is watching you. You know, in 1984, this notion of a, let's say, leftist socialist tyranny being that no one had any choice because the state governs everything and determines everything. In a Western capitalist mode, Neil Postman says, you can actually watch Big Brother watching you and be entertained by it. And he already said this in the 90s, and I think you may know that, of course, the rise of reality TV also in the US happened precisely in the 90s. Their first show was called The Real World. So they just take these words, you know, the real. This is like haq. So you just take it. Doesn't really matter, as he's saying. It's just something to make money, right? So the fact that you're actually denaturing and depleting this sacred word of everything, just call it the real world. What was that first so-called reality TV show about? It just showed a bunch of teenagers living together, getting into fights and backbiting and, you know, everyday life really at its basest form. And it showed this, and all of a sudden, millions of people were watching MTV. This was a social phenomenon. As a cultural manifestation, it's really a kind of horrific turning point. The beginning of so-called reality TV. It's reality. Oh, this is reality. And what happened there is after some time, a show called Big Brother emerged. Okay. And he was really right. Before it even emerged, he was talking about this. He says that you get to watch these things as those things are invading your spheres of sacred life. And then we know, of course, that also Mr. Trump, you know, The Apprentice, he also for about 14 years was the head of a reality show on television, and then eventually taking over political power. So Neil Postman is telling us that all of these things come wedded together. Fallen forms of education, fallen forms, of course, of entertainment, fallen forms and understandings of cosmology as scientism and technologism. When all of these things come together, it makes it seem as if this is a natural mythic universe you're living in, and it's the best of all time. So he says, watch out for that kind of tyranny. Why? He says, what I'm saying is that our enthusiasm for technology can turn into a form of idolatry, and our belief in its beneficence can be a false absolute. You see?
What
so that means after you get rid of the original traditional systems of value, the metaphysical, when you get rid of all of those things, of course, you're going to construct new values for your new technological devices and idols. And then we'll tell everybody that this is the only option, and it is the real world. And so you supplant traditional forms of life, sacred forms of life with this. So so this is basically it. A quick rundown of the points. First, we always pay a price for technology, so be wary of the hidden costs and the hidden prices that are never told to you. The greater the technology is, the higher the price. The second point, there are always winners and losers, and the winners always try to persuade us that we are also, everybody is a winner. So watch out for that kind of marketing and ideology. The third one is that there is always embedded in every technology epistemological, political, and social social prejudices and values. What are those? Do not simply look at the material form. Ask yourself about the epistemological and about the ethical and about the spiritual presuppositions that lie behind the manufacturing and producing of such products, right? What vision governs this? That's the third point. Because sometimes they are destructive. You bring out the printing press, then certain forms of oral culture get destroyed. And you bring out, for example, these devices that we have now, and as Sidi Timur said, reading all of a sudden, starts to decline. So we should watch out. The fourth point, technological change is not additive, it is ecological. And last but not least, technology tends to become mythic, and it tends to become seen as part of the natural order of things. And therefore, it tends to control our lives in a way which we do not understand, right? So this also should be understood. So what kind of myths do we want to live? Is the life that I'm living based on a true story, a true myth? And myth in itself, as a last remark, means witness account. Mythos means witness account, the story of the real. The real stories that the religious traditions tell us are the original myths. And pseudo-myths are, of course, what we often tend to have. So I'll leave you with that. These were the 5 points, insights, called 5 Things We Need to Know About Technological Change by Neil Postman. And again, would be happy to take any questions or comments if you have a few minutes.
So modernity is like, if you take it an example like water, we put water in any container, it takes the shape of the container. So modernity itself is an ever-evolving process, and technology is an aspect of that. So we can take the technological change in the perspective of liquid modernity.
Yes, this is an excellent insight. Yes, this is related actually to what a lot of the, let's say, early, so-called Muslim reformers were actually doing. They were not really realizing this, right? So one of their prejudices or assumptions was that, well, what's happening here? Well, in terms of, let's say, geopolitical power, modern scientific advancement, the Muslim world is falling behind, they thought. So how do we address the situation? We're in a, they had inferiority complexes, so we have to somehow catch up and we have to adapt and adopt. So what did they try to do? Exactly, they did not understand that these things are ecological and liquid. They said that, well, we can actually just basically keep our, let's say, Muslim tenets, and all we do is just we basically bring over and transfer and graft, as if it's like a skin grafting, you just bring some new skin and you just put it on, and somehow that this is going to make us more advanced and modern, but we don't have to give up. We definitely do not have to give up on any kind of traditional Islamic values, right? This was the same notion that things were seen as atomistic, as if you can simply take a technology and decouple it and take it apart, and it's not really integral to that water, the liquidity of modernity, as you said. Yes. So this is a great insight. But the moderns themselves, this is what is really schizophrenic. The moderns themselves, all the way up to this moment, you see, did not see it like that themselves. You see? So they themselves simply thought that we're just doing some experiments here, right? The fact that I'm doing some experiments in front of a fireplace, trying to basically see, well, who am I, and what is the nature of the natural environment by Mr. Descartes, he didn't really think of that. This was like these were thought experiments, right? The fact that he decided to cut off himself from his forefathers and all of the traditions up to that point. The fact that he, in some sense, reimagined his own body, as well as the order of nature, as really dead matter that had no consciousness, depleting it, see, of its sacred content. No, I mean, these are just thought experiments, you know, and it just spreads here and there, and you know, just doing some abstract experiments. But to see that, well, look at what you have actually unleashed and set off, and who was it exactly that you were serving? I mean, where did this stuff come from? You see, so at that level of deep insight, I think sometimes there is again, dealing with a lot of people who are in applied business and applied sciences, I see that these questions are not asked, and they often say, well, no, scientific and mathematical investigations, they're okay. You just have to regulate applied forms. So they're not really realizing that it's all liquid, as you said. So this is an excellent point. Even the critics of modernity in the West are only realizing it now. You know? So, yes.
This is directly related to my health and the food I have taken within last 1 year. I have changed my food from, you can say, synthetic oils, and also from, you can say, cola drinks. I have converted cola drinks to kahwa. I have changed my diet from synthetic oils to desi ghee. And the observation and the results I have got from that, you can't, you can say, there is no, you can say that the technology has its drawbacks. That is not, you can say it is good or it is bad. No. So if you want to take the synthetic oils, that is not good and bad. You have to convert to all the traditional things if you want to taste the traditional tastes. So I'm surprising that it has a relevance to my experience within last 1 year, that if you have to use the telephone or smartphones, it has the consequences. So it is not free for everything. It's very interesting. So the main thing is that you can't taste the benefits of the traditional things if you want to travel in that island. It's not free. Just like you have told the experiment that you add some saffron in the liquid. So the water is a saffron water. I can take it from that point of view, that if you want to apply the technology on your body, and you are saying, no, this is also good, this is bad, how can it be? And an example I can say that what we are doing with our stomachs, and then complaining that we have constipation, we have to went to doctor and take medicine, and in spite of that, if we want to put in our mouth the correct foods that are not responsible for the constipation, that will be a right synthesis. I don't think so that it is relevant or not. I must have surprising results I have gotten within last year. I want to thank you.
No, thank you. No, thank you. This is definitely. I mean, I think with Sayyid Rizwan, and I think he has also mentioned this to Sidi Taimur, that of course we're also considering of having a session actually on health, you know, and what is the understanding of modern school medicine, you see, and all of its foundations and its applications versus, of course, traditional modes of health and well-being. And the Prophet, peace be upon him, of course, he says that you know, that the best medicine is food, that food is medicine. I mean, this is what I'm saying, the duality. There's this duality which says that, for example, food is something that I consume to, in some sense, satiate my hunger, and then if I'm ill, I take synthetic medicine.
Yes, that's right.
You see, whereas like this is already in some sense having fallen into this radical dualism, because the Tibetan and the Unani and also the Chinese and the original Indian, I mean, these are integral ways, and you see, in Germany, we talk about this, that people, for example, because they are so often, in the corporate world and in the academic world and in all other spheres, so overwhelmed by the level of stress that they are living. These are rituals, right? These are rituals which are being performed. When they do this, then they simply again want to do that move, which is the non-liquid illusion, which is, okay, I basically overwhelm myself and make myself psychologically and physically ill. And to basically, well, that's not good because my efficiency drops, you see. If I become ill, my efficiency drops, then maybe my boss is upset with me. So what do? I do business yoga. So, for example, I go and I decide that, for example, we get a trainer who comes in for 15 minutes, let's say in the afternoons. We do that to boost our business efficiency. Whereas, of course, yoga, in some sense, is the way that a yogi really lives, for life, and it is sacred form. And this is what happens, that the name for this probably is co-option and instrumentalization. You see, so where we deracinate, that means we uproot. We take aspects, of course, that we like. We cherry pick, we take this and that, but we actually are not really rooted in an integral traditional way of life very often. But to alleviate some of our pains, because we have not been able to yet now to solve them with the modern forms either, we're desperate, right and left. Now, it's not bad if one goes to some of these original forms. But what I'm also observing is that it is dangerous because, for example, in the 1960s, with the cultural revolutions happening in the US and in Europe, the hippie generation, when they talk about love and peace and flower power, you see, they went to the East, and especially to India. And, for example, pick and chose certain aspects of sacred texts, let's say the Bhagavad Gita, and they actually forgot that the entire thing is happening on the spiritual battlefield of the soul. So, for example, it had to do not really with struggling, actually doing the greater struggle against my ego within the inner battlefield, but rather simply saying, well, I'll pick some really nice things where I don't really have to move out of my comfort zone, and I'll adopt some incense, and I'll do some yoga every once in a while, and I listen to some new agey music, and then I feel I'm a bit enlightened. Whereas the internal structure was not really changed. So this is one of the dangers we might point to, that those people who are looking for quick fixes, you see, very often are going to go to some traditional forms that are marketed. But this by no means means that I am, as you said, making that journey and letting go of some of the things, of course, that are the technologies of the modern world. There has, in some sense, I would say, maybe just as a point to supplement what Neil Postman has said, in traditional cultures and religious universes, there's always been the mode of detachment. So through prayer, through meditation, through contemplation, and the mode of engagement, which is the action, which is the active life. So the contemplative life and the active life, a life of prayer and meditation, and then of course a life of engagement. And it seems that given that we are confronted by such an aggressive, domineering, tyrannical form of scientism in all of the technologies which have now pervaded our lives, one is passive acquiescence. You just go along with it and you sleep. You just let it take you wherever it may. The other thing is, when you become aware of it, of course, you become discontent and you feel like this is not right. This is not just, this is inhuman, and it is oppressing my humanity. So then a natural instinct is to become overly reactionary and aggressive. But I think what the traditional religions and forms of life teach us is that it's not being for passively or being against in a reactionary fashion, but rather being centered, so that the more one is rooted in terms of the mythical stories of our traditions, meaning the story of Sayyidina Adam alayhi salam, and what really happens there, being passed down through the tradition, prophet after prophet, as real, not as stories of the past, but really as something which I meditate upon on a daily basis, not alone, but with those who are also following the path in community. And of course, mashallah, doing beautiful things the way that Hastoneest is implementing, allowing the traditional forms to really be revived and practiced. This allows the centering organically. And when that happens, then I don't have to simply passively consume or try to go out and destroy these things. I, in some sense, actually develop a kind of shield of protection so that such things may happen. So that, let's say, Skype and Facebook are not dominating me, but perhaps they become avenues. Mashallah, I mean, I'm always just blown away by how many posts I always pop up by Sidi Timur. So I mean, I have a very hard time. So I'm an amateur, but every day so many things are posted and so active, and these are also through the channels of technology. Now, how is this possible? How is it possible to distribute, ihsani work, really? You see, excellent beauty. How is that possible? Well, in this day and age, we're trying these forms as well. That doesn't mean we have to be dominated by it, or acquiesce to it, or fight against it in a way that basically empties us and decenters us. So I would say that a healthy centering and, in some sense, contemplative life, which then leads to beautiful engagement. This is one thing that we can positively do. I think Neil Postman, of course, says, watch out, watch out, watch out, it's warning. So then we're left with the question of, then what shall you do? Just watch out and, but it means, in a sense, maybe disengage, say la ilaha, but then you have to affirm. You have to say the illallah. How do you do that, in some sense? And so inshallah, I think the Hastoneest way, may it live on, and so may more and more, inshallah, come and be able to participate and grow and become more centered. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Allah Hafiz.